Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name is Mike. I'm a project coordinator. We're here with Africa Fire Mission, and I'm so happy that you all took the time out of your busy schedules to come and join us for today's training. Today's training, we're talking about psychological first aid, and we've got Nancy Moore with us today, who is a subject matter expert on this. She spent her career in social work and is also one of our founders and the executive director here of Africa Fire Mission. We're so excited to have her here today with us. If you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you'll receive a certificate of attendance for completing the course. After we get finished, I invite you to stick around for tea time. It's a time where you can ask a couple more questions about today's presentation, or you can talk about any other topic that may be on your mind. Before we get started today, we're going to pass it over to Jose, Africa Fire Mission's fire safety advocate, for a few words of encouragement.
Thank you so much, Chief Mike, and thank you everyone for joining in. Thank you also, Nancy, for joining us today. Well, today I have a word of encouragement as usual, and I was just in my quiet time, I was just thinking, what really makes a good fireman, and how can we work to become better at this? You know, and of course, I didn't have the right answers. So I went out to on Google and I got some few things or items that can guide us. You know, of course they are broad, but I just picked up one line after the other, and I got to have 5 pillars. Yeah, one of the pillars is knowledge. Yeah, and we are called as firefighters to have some knowledge in areas that we are supposed to go and serve the people. For example, be it smoke reading, be it search and rescue, be it community fire development, just have knowledge in it. Yeah. Number 2, on top of knowledge, on the 5 pillars, the second pillar is skill. You need to have a skill on that particular area. Yeah. And how do you have skill? You need to get to continuously train in that particular field until you become a master. In fact, what I usually say is keep on doing it correctly until you fail. You'll get it right when you fail. The first time you'll get it right, the second time you'll get it right, the 70th time you might get it wrong. That's actually when you know, I am actually skilled at this. Number 3, you need to stay grounded, or should I say humility? You need to have humility in you. You recognize that you as a person, you're continuously wanting to learn. Yeah, you want to have improvement. And by that, you actually get to reduce your ego. Yeah. Number 4, you need to be well. You need to have wellness in your mind. Yeah. You have to have mental fitness as much as physical fitness, whereby you exercise, you sleep well, and you watch out your nutrition. Yeah, we sleep very less. Yeah, and for me personally, nowadays I don't really exercise. So what I decided to do, I will be walking more. In fact, I walk to work, not because I do not have the bus fare. No, I have it, but I choose, hey, let me walk these 3 kilometers to work. It helps me to do the work. To have wellness in my mind. And the last one, as I close, is wellness. Yeah, you need to have metalness. That's a new word. Metalness is the ability to face difficult situations with resiliency, whereby you can push through challenges and succeed at it. You don't see challenges and then run away from this of that. You need to have a metal situation. Yeah. So with those 5 pillars, you can as well go and check out. I'll post the link to on the chat to what I'm talking about, and you can get to see more detail to it. Thank you so much for listening in. Back to you, Chief Mike.
Thank you, Jose. We always appreciate you being here with us too, and appreciate those words of encouragement. Before we get started with today's training, just a quick reminder, if you get disconnected or you'd like to see this training presentation again, you can find us on YouTube. Just search for Africa Fire Mission. All of our trainings are posted there, as well as keep your eye in the chat where I'll be putting a link to our Google folder. From the Google folder, you can watch the YouTube video, answer a few questions, and receive your certificate of attendance from that training as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our Executive Director of Africa Fire Mission, Miss Nancy Moore. Welcome. We're so glad to have you here today, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jose. Wow, it is really great to be face-to-face with you all today, to see many of your faces and to just get to interact with you via the chat and other ways. Thank you so much for joining the training and for everything that you do to support Africa Fire Mission and to support yourselves by accessing excellent trainings. I'm planning to join you for a few minutes of tea time today and look forward to talking beyond just the topic of the training today. But today we're going to be focused on psychological first aid. As Mike mentioned, my first career is as a social worker, and through that, I've done a lot of trainings with various people on psychological first aid and trauma and mental health. And there are so many things that we can be aware of to address mental health and to get ahead of it, most importantly. So we want to really look at that today. We're going to talk about stress. We're going to talk about things you can do to prevent an incident of trauma for yourself, and then about psychological first aid. So looking forward to that. Let me pull up my slides. And let's get started. So a few of you have maybe been around for a while, but I also want to just do a quick review about Africa Fire Mission from my perspective and give you a couple updates as we get started in terms of our work. So most of you know our goal and our mission is to increase the sustainable capacity of fire departments across Africa and really across developing communities around the world. We've been accomplishing this through training, empowerment, support, and encouragement. You've probably heard some of those terms if you've been around for a while. This is actually, we're at the end of our 10th year of Africa Fire Missions since our initial development. And we're so excited to just see programs continue to grow. We hope to be more places face-to-face where we're able to conduct trainings in the future. These are kind of AFM's 5 pillars of how we are organized as an organization. So looking at community training and development, many of you have become part of that, where you're going out into your communities and are training communities in fire safety and prevention. And that's a way that you can be involved outside of the trainings any day. Jose is available as a resource to you to help discuss opportunities for training, to get you out into your communities, and we have a whole curriculum available to you for that as well. We also conduct firefighter skills trainings, so including our online trainings. We're also providing face-to-face when we can. During those trainings, we also provide leadership development and help with legislative advocacy. We help support communities with fire service development and creation. And then we also want to look at how we can be part of technology and innovation advancement. We know at Africa Fire Mission that the things that work in the United States and in Europe and in other places are going to be different than the things that are going to work in Africa. And so we want to help you think about what those innovations are and connect you to people who will help in that creation. So those are just some things that we think will lead to transformation of the fire service and growth in Africa. and how we want to be able to support you. So getting into our topic today, I want to start with just a little bit of a conversation about first aid. And as we do that, I'm going to allow you to be able to unmute yourself if you'd like to contribute to the conversation. And I just want you to tell me a little bit. You guys, the last few weeks have been focused on first aid. What is first aid and why do we use it? We're just going to spend a couple minutes about that. You can also put your comments in the chat. What is first aid and why do we use it? Regular first aid, medical first aid. Anybody with a contribution?
Okay, I'm Daniel. I would like to take that.
Please.
First aid is immediate help given to anybody who get hurt or get an injury or get sick in the field before getting advanced care or taking them to hospital. We do first aid to save life, to prevent injury from getting worse or illness from getting worse. And also we do first aid to psychologically or to offer support to the affected, amongst other reasons.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I think we'll stop with that one today. Thanks, Danielle. Really good to hear your voice and have you here today. Yeah, so first aid is kind of that initial first response, right? It's something anybody can do. You need maybe a little bit of special training, but you also need some instinct on what to do to help stop an injury from getting worse and to initially stabilize it. And what we want to think about today is how we can do that with our minds. As firefighters, you're exposed to so many different traumatic stressors. You're exposed to different things that really need a first aid approach for your mind. And so that's really what psychological first aid is about. And what it can do is sometimes it prevents, sometimes first aid, I need a Band-Aid on an injury. That's first aid, right? I might need something more. I might need a splint. And I may need to see a doctor because of that. Maybe there's something else that I need, but sometimes first aid is all that we need in order to continue with our coping and recovery. And we can help each other with this all the time with just some basic information and training. So I want you to think about that. One of the statistics that we have related to firefighters, and this one's a little outdated now, but the recent numbers that I've seen are still similar, is firefighters compared to the general population, and this is the United States, but it gives us a good idea of what we might see in other places as well, is that the rates of suicide, as you can see, are much higher in terms of attempts, planning, and even thoughts or ideation about suicide. And so what we know, because of the traumatic stressors that firefighters experience, we know that this is a problem. That's a really high rate. 50% of people will have, nearly 50% will have some sort of thoughts, ideations about suicide. And so we want to be able to support each other in that. And so as we talk through today, we'll look at some ways that we can support each other about that. Now, when we hear the word suicide, a lot of us get nervous. We might have had those thoughts, thinking about hurting ourselves, but talking to somebody or asking somebody seems really difficult. Might seem like it's, I don't know, violating a code of some sort to ask if somebody's having those thoughts or experiences. We might think that we might cause someone who seems like they're in distress if we ask them if they are having thoughts of hurting themselves. The reality is we have a lot of research that says by asking if somebody is having suicidal thoughts or by talking about our suicidal thoughts, we don't increase the incidence of suicide. In fact, the opposite is true. We actually decrease that. So some of our bigger risks here related to suicide, and that's a whole other training, but we can actually impact that with some psychological first aid by just asking questions when we notice someone's in distress. So let's just talk about general stress for a second. Stress, and maybe you want to add your own comments about this also in the chat. Feel free to do that. But stress is at a very simple level, some sort of difficulty that causes us worry or maybe an emotional difficulty. And that's everybody experiences stress. As firefighters, you likely also experience traumatic stress because of things that you've seen or been involved with, fires that you've experienced, injuries maybe that you've had as a result of fires. And I know we have some EMS folks here too. The same is true for our EMS personnel. There's a lot of physical effects of stress. So things like excessive eating, right? Maybe heart problems, hypertension. We even see an increase in cancer, diabetes as a result of stress, anxiety-related disorders, even things like muscle and back aches come as a result of stress. So we want to pay attention to the fact that our bodies can tell us a lot about what's happening. And listening to our bodies and paying attention to them can really teach us a lot about what we might need to do. There's also behavioral effects of stress. These can be anger, being argumentative, could be rage, things like nail biting or picking at your skin, feeling like just really irritable, maybe around your family or at the fire station. Your behavior might change quickly. Some people even become, as a result of stress, overwork. So they'll work too much without enough breaks. Stress can be positive. It really can. There's some really good things where stress helps you do your job well as a firefighter. As EMTs, you're able to respond more quickly. Your brains process more quickly because of stress. Stress can be tolerable. Some people kind of will say that they thrive on stress or do well with stress. And stress can also be toxic. It can really impact our lives with that behavior and physical effects, as I mentioned. So we want to be aware of that and respond appropriately. So one of the ways that we can respond to that is by paying attention to our basic needs. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's one that's used in psychology a lot. Maybe you've seen this before. But we want to start at the bottom of this pyramid and paying attention to our physiological needs. Food, water, shelter, making sure that we are getting sleep, for instance. And then our safety needs. And then we look at belongingness and the need for love and relationships. And then how we feel about ourselves, feelings of accomplishment, those psychological needs. And then finally, self-actualization, getting to our full potential and our creative activities we might be involved in. So each one of these things really builds on each other, and our stressors become compounded. So if I've been exposed to some sort of traumatic incident as a firefighter, I am going to respond to that more with more stress, with more potential for a traumatic response if my physiological needs aren't met. So if I get back from that fire run and I'm not able to drink water and get some sleep, get some rest, some food, have a bed that I feel comfortable in, that is going to impact me. And so that's one of the things you can do immediately, is to think about, are my basic needs being met? Just starting there. I won't even go beyond that right now. And what am I doing for my safety and security needs? Right? Is my fire station comfortable? If I'm spending several days at my fire station or long shifts at my fire station, does it feel safe? And on those things that maybe your psychological need, or your physiological needs or your safety needs aren't being met, perhaps there's something you can do, or maybe collectively you can do with your firefighter family in order to address that. Maybe it's doing a cleanup at your fire station or even at your house. Maybe it's helping to work together to think about, okay, how do we get more access to clean water? Maybe it's even for our community or our home. So looking at those things and looking first and foremost, how do I make sure my basic needs are met? So another thing that can happen is burnout. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on burnout, but this is something that we can also apply psychological first aid to, is this idea that physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion causes burnout. And so we want to be aware that we can be emotionally exhausted. We might start to depersonalize things and maybe blame others for things. We start to not feel accomplished, and this can gradually get worse. And so we want to watch out for each other for burnout as well, and point it out when it happens. I remember, and I'll share a few stories along this line, but my husband, as many of you know, is a firefighter, and he's experienced burnout on the job. I've watched many of our team members who reach this point of burnout, sometimes because of overtime. They're asked to spend additional hours at the fire station because staffing might be short. There's not enough people to meet the needs. Various things can cause that. And if we look back then to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, oftentimes burnout has something to do with the first basic needs, physiological and safety needs, not being met. So we want to be conscious of that. So some things we might see is decreased job performance, temper flare-ups. We're not interested in the things that we used to be, or we lack motivation. So then before we talk about the first aid piece, I want to just make sure we are all together on trauma. Trauma comes as an event or a series of events or set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. Physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. And usually that life-threatening piece is a big part of it. It can also come as something that we've experienced where we've seen someone else having experienced a trauma and kind of living that through them. And that's called secondary trauma. Trauma has lasting adverse effects on us, on our physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And there are lots of things that we can do, and it starts with this idea of psychological first aid. So we're going to talk about that. And I just want you to think about, we're not going to do this out loud today. I just want you to think about what kinds of incidents that you respond to. Maybe you want to put it in the chat that might cause you stress, burnout, trauma, or secondary trauma for you. And if you choose to put things in the chat, be aware of be less specific perhaps, so we don't cause a secondary trauma as we talk today. But these could be things that you witness or experience directly. So think about that. What are the kinds of incidents you respond to that cause that? And many times there's many types of incidents, right? It could be a car wreck, it could be a fire, It could be helping to rescue somebody from a pit latrine. All of those things, a severe injury that somebody's had, a vehicle extrication. So being aware, all of those things can cause us to experience trauma, stress, or burnout. And everyone experiences it differently. Not everyone experiences it the same. So when we start to think about what do we do, how do we address this, we want to think about it from a perspective of being trauma informed. Because each of you are likely to experience trauma in your career, we want to think about asking what's happened, what's going on, instead of what's wrong with you or stop being that way, just get over it. That we know from research does not work. It actually can cause the person to feel less supported and impede their healing. So we want to focus on how you can support each other. You know, each one of us are a sponge. We're a sponge. We absorb all the things that we experience. And sometimes we need to wring out that sponge, right? If a sponge gets too wet, it's no good anymore, right? It's no good anymore. It doesn't do its job as a sponge. And if we get too much absorbed in the things we've experienced without doing something to balance it, we also aren't going to be productive in our careers or for our families. So some signs of trauma to be aware of, that you might be experiencing trauma. I'm not going to go through all of these or spend a lot of detail on them, but you might feel overwhelmed, like you can't relax, you can't rest, you might not be sleeping, you may not have sufficient recovery time. So maybe you had one fire incident and then you turned around and there was a medical response that you had to help with. That can really be difficult for you because you haven't had time to recover. You haven't had time to check in with your colleagues. Sometimes some symptoms you might see could be recurring nightmares or just nightmares in general, disturbing dreams. You might not be able to stop thinking about an incident that's occurred. It just keeps coming back in your mind. You may also think about turning to drug or alcohol use and potentially abuse those drugs and alcohol. You might feel suicidal or depressed. You might not feel like completing your daily activities. All of these things could be something else, but they could be a sign of trauma. And so we want to be aware of that, of an emotional trauma. This is a picture of Dave Moore, the founder of Africa Fire Mission. And I wanted to share a little bit of his story with his permission, of course. And about, I don't know, it's been some time ago now. Dave was, had an active job as a firefighter. He was still a firefighter at that time. He was not a chief officer yet. And he went on a medical call, actually, for a shooting that had occurred in our community where he served as a firefighter. At that time, he'd been pretty stressed because of work. He'd been working a lot. He'd had a lot of different fire calls. He'd been unhappy with some things that were happening at his fire station. And in general, just experiencing a lot of personal stress, probably to the point of burnout. He went on this particular fire call, which turned out to be mostly a medical run. And as I mentioned, it had been a shooting. At that incident, he responded, the police had secured the scene. The scene seemed safe to everyone that was there. But what we learned after the fact is when he went to assist the patient, A gun fell out of that patient's pocket, and the gun was pointed at my husband's chest. He finished he was safe, but but didn't feel safe at that time. Finished the medical call, took the patient to the hospital, and actually ended up meeting with the patient's family. And the gentleman did not survive the gunshot wound. The next day, he came home and drank a little bit too much, and was responding very poorly to that incident. We were fortunate to be able to call some other firefighters to come to our home to talk to him. And he truly experienced a traumatic response to that fire. We did some psychological first aid. We utilized a critical incident stress debriefing for him. And it still took years for him to resolve that trauma and the traumatic experience that he had from that. It's interesting because as I look at his career, that particular incident didn't seem very traumatic compared to other things that he's had. But that was the run that has caused him the most difficulty in his career mentally. Okay. Thankfully, with some support from other firefighters, with the support of a therapist, he's fully recovered from that now. And of course, the traumatic memories come back occasionally, but this can happen to anyone. And that's what I want you to understand. This can happen to anyone. And there's stuff that we can do about it. So I want you to look at this grid for a moment, and we're going to build this grid. If we think about each section of the grid being something that we can do in response to keeping ourselves mentally healthy. So maybe this is getting good sleep. Maybe this is taking a walk. Maybe we're talking to a friend. Maybe we're taking care of ourselves spiritually. As you see the grid fill, there's less holes to fall through. And that's what we really want to do. We want to create a situation where you're not going to fall through the cracks. So, personally, take care of yourselves on and off the job. Acknowledge what you're experiencing and tell someone that you trust what you're experiencing. At the fire station, for others, notice if somebody isn't being themselves. Ask and let them know you've noticed. Ask if there's anything they need or anything you can do for them. Even if they don't want support, look for the ways that you can try to support that person. As a fire department, I see we have a few chief officers here today. Think about creating some policies around stress and burnout. Acknowledge that the members of your department might experience stress, burnout, trauma, secondary trauma. Think about how you create a supportive environment so your firefighters get the support that they need. We want to provide formal and informal opportunities to share about experiences on the job. Think about the ways that we can meet the needs of our members, perhaps develop a chaplaincy program, and then look for professionals who are willing to assist your firefighters with the more difficult situations. At AFM, we really look at firefighter mental health as a systematic response. So I've talked about prevention, and I'm going to spend the rest of our time talking about psychological first aid and specific things that you can do. So psychological first aid, as I mentioned, is really our first line of defense that you can use at the fire station. There's 8 actions that you can take with regard to psychological first aid. And we're going to walk through each one of these things in the rest of our time. So first is contact and engagement. So ask if somebody wants to help, wants to talk. Notice that a peer might need help, or might need to talk. Make yourself available to talk. So you can reach out to someone and, be available to them. It's an easy first way to respond. Next, offer someone who looks like they're in distress just to go for a walk or to sit down. Maybe somebody seems cold, offer a blanket or something to drink. If they're willing to talk, make sure you're in a safe and confidential space. It might be that they're not comfortable talking about this with everyone. And so if they're willing to talk to you, find a space that's confidential. Stabilize and provide support. So we want to provide calm and orient the person to their needs and help them really understand what's happening. We want to assess their immediate needs, notice what they maybe need, right? As I mentioned, with first aid, you're doing a quick assessment, right? So you're looking at what's happening here. They haven't slept in 3 days, right? What can I do to help them feel calm enough to sleep? Right? What might that be? I noticed they're just really angry today. What can I do to help them feel less angry? Right? What is it that I can do right now in this moment? So remembering, we don't want to just, if this is your friend, your firefighter brother or sister, right? They are, you know them better than any counselor, any social worker might know them. And so you have a great opportunity to respond. Next, we want to look at gathering information. Think about their current needs, their concerns, identify any immediate needs, gather additional information, and decide what's next. So you might think about listening. And when I think about listening, I want to spend a moment on this, and we'll look at this a second time as well. But we really want to listen with more than just our ears. And that can be tricky to think about because, of course, we listen with our ears, right? But what other information about a person gives us information? Their body language, how they're breathing, maybe the way that they're holding themselves might be different than usual. So really listening beyond just their words. Firefighter might say, "I'm fine." And you clearly see that they're not, right? You clearly see that something's wrong. Pay attention to that. Listen beyond the words to what they're really saying. It might be that somebody says they're fine, or you say that you're fine and you know that you're not. That's okay. Can we pay attention to the fact that they really aren't okay, though? It'd be a great opportunity to maybe offer going for a walk, something like that. If they are willing to tell you a little bit of what's going on, validate those feelings. Maybe you've experienced something like that before, validate it. Validate their needs. Maybe you want to do some breathing together. Breathing is one of those skills that we take for granted. We all breathe all the time. But one of the things when our brains are in distress because of something that we've seen or experienced, our brains go back into its primitive functioning. Our amygdala takes over. And so our cognitive functioning decreases. And when that happens, we aren't breathing in the way that we need to. We're not thinking in the way that we need to. And so taking some deep breaths, especially deep breaths into our nose and out through our mouths, can be really helpful. And so if you wanted to right now, you could do that. You want to think about breathing so that my brain feels refreshed, or maybe even a little lightheaded. So if you take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And really, I'm kind of exaggerating now and lifting my shoulders. You don't really need to do that. You really need to get that breath up to your brain. So let's do that again. In through your nose, filling your belly with that breath and your brain. And it seems silly. It seems like, yeah, okay, I'm breathing. But it really can help to shift your perspective on what's happening. Other things, provide some clear instructions. If someone's doing things that are harmful to themselves, or they need to take time off because whatever, if you have the authority, maybe you need to offer them that or suggest that they need to go talk to their boss about getting some time off. Maybe they just need to sleep. Offer them that opportunity. And then, of course, going back to listen. So some practical experience assistance, asking what they need. You might have noticed some things you think that they need, but what are they able to say that they need? I need to talk to someone. I need to sleep. I need some water, right? Noticing what is it that they need and helping to make sure that they've received it. And then next, we want to link to supportive resources. Maybe they need something in addition to what I'm able to provide. So we want to help link them to that as well. Next, we want to connect. So we connect with social supports. This could be, maybe you're at the fire station and their family needs to come. A family member needs to come, or a friend outside of the fire station that they may feel more connected with it for that moment. Helping to bring those social connections so that a person can really just feel safe and feel able to talk about what they need. Next, we can provide some basic information on coping. So some of the slides that I provided at the beginning, those are some things that you can provide information about to somebody in distress, somebody who needs that psychological first aid. Just basic information that stress is normal, that burnout happens, and that the result of our job can really cause us to experience trauma or secondary trauma. Sharing those things can help to normalize what someone's experiencing, right? Maybe you've had that experience. This could be a time to share your experience so that they understand that they're not alone. And then talk about that, normal reactions to abnormal events. In your roles, you are constantly experiencing abnormal events. They seem normal to you, right? Because they're part of your everyday life, they're part of your work life, but they're not a part of what our brains are trained to experience as people. And so when you're exposed to that over and over again, you develop some tolerance for it, like we do for anything that we train for. We get good at it. But sometimes those abnormal reactions are going to happen. And we could also talk about what might happen next. You know, they might need some time off work, or maybe they need just the rest of the day off, or perhaps getting some good sleep will assist them. Maybe you're thinking that they need to talk to a counselor and checking in to see if they're open to that. So providing good information about what might be available and how you'll support them is really a great thing. And then, of course, as I was starting to mention, we want to link to those collaborative services. This could be someone outside of the fire station. Some fire departments are developing specific peer support programs where people are trained to help respond. Maybe they need a formal debriefing of the event, and there's a variety of ways that we can do that. So think about what they need next, what you might be able to help connect them to. And if you don't have resources, ask someone else for what they might be able to access. So if you remember nothing else from what we talk about today, I want you to remember these 3 words: look, listen, link. Look, listen, link. So look, pay attention to a situation. Establish what has or what is happening. Establish that someone needs help. Identify safety risks or things that the person views as a safety risk at that moment. If there's any physical injuries that the person has, we of course want to address those. And we want to identify basic and practical needs. Finally, notice emotional reactions. Just observe, pay attention, look, okay? Next, we're going to listen. Next, we're going to listen. So if you know the person, you obviously don't need to introduce themselves, but maybe you don't know the person, so you might introduce themselves. You also can provide psychological first aid to members in the community, right? So this is something you can use even outside the fire station. Next, pay attention. Actively listen, as we mentioned. Accept how someone else feels, even if you don't understand it. Work to calm the person in distress, ask about their needs, help the person find solutions. Your solutions might not be their solutions, so be cautious of that. Finally, link. Find information, connect the person with loved ones and social supports, connect to formal services, and if there's practical problems, help to address those with the individual. Look, listen, and link. So today we looked a little bit at prevention and psychological first aid, but there's many other types of supports that can be put into place for the fire service, especially. So things like peer support, critical incident or crisis incident stress management, professional support, so identifying community outpatient providers or inpatient treatment that might be available, and then developing fire department policies and procedures that identify and work with firefighter mental health. So those are our main focuses. As I said, today we focused on the first 2. We'll find times to look at some of the others in the future. And there's some additional resources on this that you can get, some additional training you can take on your own. So these resources, everyonegoeshome.org, info-trauma.org, and learn.nctsn.org. All of these places have specific trainings related to the fire service that you are welcome to access. Some of the other information we used, or most of the information we used was pulled from those resources today as well. So I want to open up to see if there's any questions, things that related to this topic that we can address in the last few minutes here. And if you'd like, you can unmute yourself and ask questions. Someone's unmuted themselves, but I can't hear you. Anyone else with some questions? Or comments? Let me ask this question. Is this something that you experience in your place where you've seen a need for psychological first aid?
Yes, yes, psychological trauma as a first aid is something we experience with people,
Yeah,
our workmates,
of
and
course.
we try to support them. We also do suffer going through the signs and symptoms, or
Uh-huh.
how we presentation. We recognize some of those as our own, as some of exhibition we go through.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And sometimes it's helpful to just look at those symptoms and go, oh, is that what's happening? You know, and just to notice and understand. It's why one of those concepts is to educate just about those signs and symptoms, because sometimes we don't even realize that's what we're experiencing.
And actually, sometimes we realize way later after experiencing and going through it, but after reflecting back, what you were feeling last fortnight, you realize, hey, I was going through some trauma there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where, as peers, you can support others when you notice them going through something that maybe they're not noticing because they're just in it, right? They're just experiencing that moment and taking the opportunity to say, how can I support you? I see this. I'm not sure if you're realizing what might be happening here. Excellent. Thank you.
Hello, Nancy.
Yeah. Hello, good to see you.
How are you?
I'm okay, thanks.
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, sometimes in 2007, if I can remember, I remember it correctly. We had a scene where truck versus car bumped each other, and some guys' head got blown up, and then the only thing that we could see is to identify a person is via DNA or the skin of the skin, of the face. So it was a long time, but what I realized in most of the time, like this topic right now that you just got in psychological first aid, it brings everything out through the head, but it's like secondary trauma, but it fixes everything. But the only thing that's this encouraging most of the fire station, they don't have that psychologist in the fire station that can help the firefighters to fix or to help them talk about all the scenes that they went through. They just leave it like that. But
Yeah.
it only needs management to interfere on that, or needs the station to talk to the management, or to send a letter to the management so that they can send all those psychologists. They must have an office in the fire station, because the moment we leave all those stuff in our heads, the time that you are resigning or you taking your package, whatever, it's gonna blow up inside me, in the middle of the people, when you're in the mall, and then you think that you are all alone. Meanwhile, you are not alone. You are with people that you don't know, or you are with the community.
Yes.
Because of you did not cure yourself in that time.
Yeah. And thanks for that contribution. I think it's really important as a social worker, as a mental health professional. I understand the value of professionals. However, I think sometimes we say, There's no one to help us. So I'm just gonna wait. Well, that's like seeing somebody at the side of the road that's bleeding and not helping to stop the bleeding. Right? And so we need to help as they are more likely actually to talk to you as their peer, for you guys to talk to each other and support each other. You're actually more likely to stop the traumatic response if you're supportive with each other. You know, there've been a lot of research in the United States about this, and we're certainly working on expanding professionals with training and understanding first responder response. But what we've also learned is we need peers. We need each other to stop the bleeding, right? And to say, and to look at that wound and say, you need a counselor, right? You need a doctor. You need additional help beyond what my first aid can provide. Does that make sense? And so, but a lot of times, if we just ignore the bleeding to begin with, we've already lost, right? The person bleeds to death and they die because nobody stopped the bleeding. So that's what we're working on first. Yes, there's all kinds of other things, but first we've got to stop the bleeding. And mentally, that's what we're looking at here. So thank you for those comments. Thanks for your participation today. And Mike, I'll send it back to you for wrapping up.
Thanks, Nancy. That's going to wrap things up for today's formal part of the training. I invite you all to stick around for tea time. We'll have a few more moments and a few more words from Nancy at the start of our tea time. Once again, I want to thank everybody for coming to today's training with your time, with your bundles, and all those sorts of things. We appreciate it just as much as you guys appreciate this training. Special thanks to Nancy for coming. It's always great to see her come and get to interact with us again. We always appreciate that. So thank you, Nancy, for coming today. If you got cut off, if your network stopped, look for us on YouTube, search for Africa Fire Mission. You'll be able to find a recording of today's training. It'll be posted in a few hours or by tomorrow. And also take a look in the chat where I placed a link for our Google folder where you can see all of our trainings from this year, answer a few questions about them, and receive a certificate of attendance as well. So thanks again, and we will see you all again next week. Be sure to invite your friends. Same time, same place. Thanks, everybody.